The closing was set for Friday morning at the title company, the same day she would be back. By Friday afternoon, when I'd normally be driving home, the deed would already be transferred, the money wired to cover Marcus's debt, and my house legally owned by someone else. It was all timed perfectly. I called Janet immediately and gave her the full schedule. She didn't hesitate. "Good," she said calmly. "I'll file the freeze before they even open on Friday." Later, Ed mentioned that the buyer, a man named Ray, had stopped by to measure the rooms. He seemed decent, unaware of what he was walking into. I stared at the moths hitting the porch light, thinking how some things are drawn straight toward what will burn them. The next morning I checked my mailbox and felt my chest tighten. It wasn't just empty for the day. It was empty like no mail had come in weeks. Dust inside. No sign of use. I drove straight to the post office and asked Tasha, a former classmate, to check my forwarding status. She typed, paused, frowned, then read aloud that a change of address request had been filed 2 weeks earlier. My mail was being redirected to Gerald's house, supposedly authorized by me. I knew instantly I hadn't signed anything. He showed me the screen. The signature looked close, but it wasn't mine. I sign with a slight forward slant. This one was stiff and upright. My father had practiced it, but he didn't get it right. I told Tasha it was forged, and I could see the realization hit her. I drove to Gerald's place. He wasn't there, but his mailbox was packed. I recognized the envelopes immediately. The title company, the buyer's agent, a certified letter from the county assessor. 2 full weeks of my mail had been intercepted and hidden. Every notice that could have warned me was sitting there. Closing details, title search documents, buyer communication, all redirected to his kitchen table. He hadn't just tried to sell my house. He made sure I wouldn't find out in time. I took photos without touching anything and called Janet. When I told her about the forged forwarding form, her tone changed. "That's federal," she said quietly. "That's the U.S. Postal Inspection Service." This wasn't small anymore. Sitting in my truck outside my father's house, the truth settled in. The man who had managed that post office for 30 years knew exactly how the system worked. He knew which form to use and how to submit it without raising suspicion. He counted on no one questioning paperwork filed by a retired postal manager. For 3 weeks he had been building a trap. What he didn't know was that the power of attorney he was relying on had expired 2 years ago. And I was ready to prove it. Let me step outside the story for a moment. Fathers don't accidentally forge their daughter's signature. He practiced my handwriting. He understood the process inside and out. And when Marcus called 2 weeks earlier asking about my schedule, that wasn't concern. That was checking my movements. So I have to ask, why didn't he just ask me for help? He had 3 weeks. What was he so certain I would say no to? By Thursday afternoon, things were no longer quiet. I stopped by Mill Haven Hardware to pick up stain for a client. Dennis Pute, the owner who had known me for years, looked at me with a kind of uneasy sympathy. The kind people use when they know something you don't. "Everything okay at home, Ren?" he asked gently. My stomach tightened. Asked why. He said my dad had been in the store the day before. And the look on his face told me whatever my father had said, it wasn't good. Dennis told me that my father had bought packing tape and mentioned that Marcus was in serious trouble and that I was refusing to help. And when I asked exactly what was said, he avoided my eyes and repeated that I cared more about keeping an old house than protecting my brother from danger. I left the store feeling unsettled and went to the Main Street Cafe, ordered a coffee I didn't really want, and noticed 2 women from the farmer's market whispering when I walked in. I stepped outside and spoke clearly, explaining that the power of attorney my father used was officially revoked 2 years earlier, filed and recorded with the county clerk, and that any contract he signed using that document was legally invalid. The porch became very quiet, the kind of heavy silence that feels meaningful. My father first tried to deny it, saying it was impossible, but I reminded him that he had only checked the copy he kept in his drawer and not the public county record, which anyone could verify. Color slowly drained from his face as confidence disappeared and realization set in that his foundation was gone. Ray Colton, holding the contract, became visibly angry and said my father had told him the deal was legitimate and that the power of attorney was valid since he had paid a $20,000 deposit based on that promise. My father tried to say the revocation could be legally challenged, but Janet Holloway arrived and firmly explained that the revocation was recorded under Virginia law and could not be undone, advising Mr. Colton to consult his own attorney about recovering his deposit from Gerald. Ray folded the contract, placed it in his jacket, and left without another word, clearly feeling deceived. Gerald stood on the porch holding the failed paperwork while my mother silently watched without defending him for the first time I could remember. When I was alone with my father, he tried to shift to a quieter, more controlled tone, warning that Marcus owed dangerous people money and that if the sale failed, my brother could be hurt when they returned at the end of the month. But I stayed calm because I knew the legal truth was already on my side. That I looked directly at my father and said that he had 3 weeks to tell me Marcus was in trouble, to sit down and talk honestly, but instead he tried to sell my house. He insisted he was protecting the family, especially Marcus, but I told him there was a difference between protecting someone and sacrificing another person. When he warned that if something happened to Marcus the responsibility would be on me, pointing toward me in front of the porch guests, I stayed calm and told him the blame belonged to the person who lost $87,000 and chose fraud instead of talking directly to his daughter. We stared at each other for several seconds, and for the first time I saw my father look away first. My mother gently told him it was time to leave, and they walked slowly to the car without speaking. Then I explained again that the power of attorney my father used had been officially revoked 2 years earlier, recorded and notarized at the county clerk's office, which meant any contract he signed using it was legally invalid. The porch stayed completely quiet, heavy with tension. My father tried to deny it, saying he had checked the document, but I told him he only looked at the copy he kept at home and never verified the public county records which anyone could access. Understanding slowly replaced confidence on his face as he realized the plan he trusted had collapsed. Ray Colton, holding the contract, felt betrayed and said my father had told him the deal was legitimate and that he had paid a $20,000 deposit based on that promise. Janet Holloway arrived and firmly explained that the revocation was recorded under Virginia law and could not be reversed, advising Ray to consult his own lawyer about recovering his money from Gerald. Ray placed the folded contract in his jacket, left without another word, and drove away feeling cheated. Gerald stood on the porch holding paperwork that no longer had legal meaning, watching his final business partner disappear. My mother finally did not defend him. When Gerald asked what we should do next, his voice sounded smaller, almost uncertain, because the authority he relied on was gone. My father didn't answer me. For the first time in 62 years, Gerald Archer had no plan to announce, no schedule to follow, and no decision ready to deliver. Linda Fessler stood quietly nearby, watching everything, then looked directly at me with a new expression I hadn't seen before: understanding. By the time everyone else left, only my father, my mother, and I were still there. Janet waited in her car outside with the engine running, giving me privacy to handle the moment. Then my father spoke again, but his tone was different. The authority was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like controlled pleading, though Gerald Archer was not a man who begged. He preferred to reshape the conversation. He warned me that the people Marcus owed would return if the money was not paid by the end of the month. He said my brother could be hurt if the deal failed and asked if I understood that Marcus was family. He reminded me that I had 3 weeks to reach out, but instead, in his words, I had chosen to protect the house rather than help my brother. I told him I did not steal anything. I said I was protecting myself and that there was a difference between helping someone and sacrificing another person. His expression hardened briefly, the old controlling confidence returning, and he told me that if anything happened to Marcus, the blame would fall on me. I replied that the responsibility belonged to the person who lost $87,000 and chose fraud instead of speaking honestly to his daughter. We stared at each other for several long seconds until my father was the first to look away. My mother gently touched his elbow and said it was time to leave. They walked slowly toward the car, quieter than I had ever seen them. My father's steps were heavier and slower than I remembered, and my mother did not turn back to look at me. Later, during the Heritage Home Tour, I spoke to visitors and told them I believed nothing is too damaged to repair if people are willing to put in the effort. The audience responded with real applause, and many of the 43 visitors stayed longer to talk about the restoration. Dennis later found me and apologized for doubting me, saying he had heard the truth. Linda also came and said she owed me an apology because my father had told her a very different story earlier. Let me be honest for a moment. During the tour, part of me felt emotional not because of success, but because I kept thinking my father had driven past this house for 3 years without once coming inside. Yet 43 strangers walked through the door, appreciated the restoration, and understood the meaning of the place. I still wonder whether my father ever truly looked at the house the way I did. On Monday morning, I met Janet at her office. She confirmed the emergency freeze was in place and that the deed remained legally in my name. The title company had already marked Gerald's transaction as invalid. Ray Colton had hired his own lawyer and was suing my father to recover the $20,000 deposit plus legal expenses. Janet then spoke honestly about the legal risks. Under Virginia law, using a revoked power of attorney to complete a property sale is considered fraud and can carry a Class 4 felony charge with a possible prison sentence of up to 10 years. Forging a postal change of address form is also a serious federal offense investigated by postal authorities. I sat quietly, understanding the weight of those consequences and what they meant for my father's future. My father, a retired post office manager who had worked faithfully for 30 years, wore a tie to work every day, and even organized his spice rack alphabetically, could face prison because of what happened. Janet told me I had two options. I could press criminal charges and let the justice system handle everything, or I could choose not to prosecute and instead have her prepare a legally binding agreement. That agreement would prevent my father from ever using any document in my name again, limit contact with me to legal representatives only, and require him to formally acknowledge the revoked power of attorney in writing. I chose the second option because I did not want revenge. I wanted distance. Janet said I was being kinder than he deserved, but I told her he was still my father. I just could not allow him to continue being my father at my emotional and financial expense. 3 weeks later, Ray Colton won his civil lawsuit. My father was ordered to repay the $20,000 deposit using funds from his retirement account. That night, my mother called me crying and said my father's retirement savings were gone. I stayed quiet for a moment and told her that my house had also been taken from me. The people who had threatened Marcus were later traced by the sheriff's office. Ed's photographs of the rental car, the license plate, and the men's descriptions helped match an ongoing investigation into an unlicensed lending group operating out of Richmond. One suspect was arrested at a motel in Westboro, while the other escaped south, though authorities believed he would be caught eventually. The $87,000 Marcus owed turned out to be tied to illegal lending. Under Virginia law, loans from unlicensed lenders charging unfair interest are considered invalid and cannot be enforced. Marcus' debt was completely erased, not reduced or negotiated, but legally treated as if it never existed. Marcus was left without the burden but also without the money he had borrowed. After this, my parents finally stopped rescuing him financially. They gave Marcus two choices: join Gamblers Anonymous and attend financial counseling, or manage his life on his own. There would be no more loans, no more rent payments, and no more trucks bought for him. Marcus reluctantly agreed, understanding that the alternative was worse. I did not contact Marcus directly, but I asked Ed to place a printed card in his mailbox showing the schedule for a Gamblers Anonymous meeting in Staunton, the next county over, where he would not be recognized. I did this not to help Marcus alone but because I understand what rebuilding means after destruction. Recovery starts with the right support, and sometimes the best help is simply giving someone information and letting them choose their path. In a small town, news travels quickly. In Mill Haven, the story of my father spread quietly but widely. I did not share it myself, but people talked. Linda told the Heritage Tour Committee. Dennis mentioned it to regular customers at the hardware store. Ray Colton told his attorney, who passed it along to others. Like water moving through old plaster, the truth spread slowly at first and then reached everywhere. My father's reputation changed. Once he was seen as a respected retired postal manager, a community supporter who donated wreaths to the VFW every Christmas. After the truth came out, that he forged my mail forwarding, used a revoked power of attorney, and sold my house to cover Marcus's gambling debt, people began treating him differently. Pastor Reynolds invited him for a private conversation at church, but he did not attend. He stopped going to services and my mother attended alone, sitting quietly in the back. At the Veterans Organization's winter dinner, my father's name was not on the guest list and nobody asked why. Even at the hardware store, Dennis said my father only came once to buy weather stripping and left quickly without talking to anyone. The first time my father didn't look me in the eye happened in the grocery store in Mill Haven. The town market only has 5 aisles, which makes avoiding people you have known for decades almost impossible. After that, my mother started driving 15 miles to shop at the Kroger in the next town just to avoid uncomfortable encounters. That is what shame feels like in a small community. Longer drives and extra fuel just to keep distance. My father never apologized to me. Not once in a letter, not through my mother, and not through Marcus. By Thanksgiving, I stopped expecting an apology, but he also stopped talking about me to anyone in town. Sometimes silence is the only way certain people know how to express regret. My mother called the week before Thanksgiving and asked if I would come for dinner. I was fixing a chipped piece of crown molding inside the parlor, and the house smelled like fresh sawdust and wood oil. Ed was outside raking leaves slowly, moving carefully because of his age. I told my mother I loved her but could not sit at a table with someone who sold my home behind my back and then called me selfish for trying to protect it. I told her I was not closing the door on him, but I was putting a lock on it. If my father truly wanted to talk, he could write me a real letter in his own handwriting without using lawyers or sending messages through others. My mother repeated the word letter as if it were unfamiliar. Perhaps it was because my father had spent 30 years sorting other people's mail but rarely wrote his own thoughts down. She told me I was being stubborn. I told her I was being clear. There is a difference between stubbornness and healthy boundaries. I ended the call and placed the phone on the windowsill. The colored light from the stained glass transom fell across my hands, showing amber, blue, and green reflections like quiet approval. Then I returned to finishing the molding with my chisel. Some people think boundaries are walls meant to punish others, but I see them as doors that I control. A locked door is not permanent rejection. It simply means someone must knock before entering. No one had ever taught my father how to knock or wait for permission. Maybe one day he would learn. By December, the Heritage Home Tour had brought me 3 new restoration projects. One was an old farmhouse in Augusta County with a strong stone foundation. Another was a 1910 square-style house in Westboro with serious water damage but very good structural bones. And the third was a small brick cottage in Staunton that a young couple purchased cheaply because others saw decay while I saw opportunity. I always start by examining structure first. Ed still lives next door. Every Saturday morning he knocks on my door, always actually knocking, and brings 2 cups of coffee from the gas station on Route 11. We sit on the porch talking about simple things like plumbing parts, weather patterns, or the hawk that circles the church tower. I hired a young assistant, Becca Trent, who is 22 and recently finished trade school. On her first day she arrived wearing steel toe boots and asked where the demolition hammer was, which made me like her immediately. I teach her the same way an old mentor once taught me. Start by checking the foundation. If the bones of a building are strong, everything else can be repaired. If the structure is damaged, then you replace the weak parts no matter how old they are. That evening I stood on my porch holding coffee while watching the sunset behind the Blue Ridge Mountains.